Right. So, what we discussed, especially in reference to the microservices OAuth 2.0, in the earlier session, we discussed about the OAuth protocol flow. That's what we have discussed. Now, when it comes to today's session, right. So, when it comes to the today's session, when I'm talking about today, so this is about the grant types. Okay, because what are the different grant types generally we use, especially on microservices. This is what generally we are discussing in today's session, because yesterday we have discussed about protocol flow, etc., on context to the OAuth, from client applications to resource server, etc., all that. But when it comes to the grant types and all everything, which normally these grant types will be categorized into 5 different parts. The first one is called authorization code. The first one is called authorization code. Next one is called implicit. The next one is called resource owner password credentials. Next will be called as client credentials, followed by refresh token. Okay, these are the different um, grant types, especially from the OAuth 2.0 is concerned, especially on microservices, which normally we have to know. Normally, when we want to understand about the granting permissions, etc., generally, whenever there is a request of an access tokens, generally the client application and all everything required. So normally, this is something which we obtain this from the authorization from the resource owner and all that. Whenever there is an authorization which is in a form of authorization grant and all everything, which normally we need to mention with this client applications, whatever the different client requests we wants to maintain and all everything. For that reason, there are different grant permissions which we have to be known with. So in these grant permissions, the first one called as authorization code. This is the first grant permission. Second, we call it as implicit. Third one is called resource owner password credentials. Next, client credentials followed by refresh token. So these are the different grant types which normally we use it. Now, when it comes to the authorization code grant type, this is what generally authorization code grant type was all about, wherein this is majorly focused from the context of the resource owner, uh, whoever are playing for resource owner part, all that. At the same time, user agents, because whoever working as user agents and all, everything will be taken into consideration. At the same time, even client applications and authorization server connect as well. So these are the major areas which we have to be focused when there is an authorization code grant type, which normally we do it. Now, when we try to understand about this part, especially in context to the authorization grant type, all that. So there is the first thing which we have to identify the client identifiers. This is what generally we have to connect from the user agents to the authorization server in the beginning time. So client identifiers, where we need to identify different types of clients, whoever the clients do we have and all. So we need to identify who are the clients, and the client identifiers and all everything is what something which we have to be known with. That is point number one. Client identifier is what something which we have to perform initially to start with. So when there is a client identifier, we do when we are connecting to the authorization server, all that. there must be a possibility, there must be a difficulty in understanding the redirection of URIs and all everything coming to existence. Because it's not only about the client identifiers, but it's also, we have to be focused more on the redirection part. What are the redirections do we have? Whatever the redirection URIs do we have, right? So all these things are comes under the user agent perspective. That is what something which we have to be performed initially to start with. So it's not only about the client identifiers, then followed by this, we need to authenticate users who are using the application wherein there are to connect with authorization servers. Because if you want to issue any kind of tokens, etc., all that through the authorization server, all that. So user agents has to authenticate the credentials which they are using to log in, right? So login credentials, right? So authentication of users. So users can be any users there, right? Users can be an external users, it can be an internal users. It need not be one, right? It can be external users also sometimes. At the same time, it can be internal users also. Internal users who are working within the application. That's where generally internal users are coming into picture, right? So maybe technical team, right? So development team, right? So all these people were developing microservices and all. These are all internal users. But whereas when it comes to the external users are concerned, external users may be third-party people who are accessing the application outside, well, especially when we are working on commercial applications, when we are developing microservices for different components, we are creating microservices. There are some external people who require some granting of permissions to access the data, whatever the required data we want to maintain. So that users authentication again varies, depends on the external user to internal user. External users, nothing but people who are supporting us from outside. But whereas when it comes to the internal users, majorly focusing on the internal perspective. So this is where generally user authentications and all everything were coming into existence. So after a user authentication, the next is authorization code. So based on the user authentication, what we have given to the authorization server, there must be an authorization code which we have to see, because authorization codes will evaluate what kind of code was mentioned here, right? So why is this code being generated, right? What kind of authorization codes do we have? All these things are comes under the authorization code perspective. So user authentication is what something which we have to be performed with. So apart from the user authentications and all, we have to perform authorization codes also. These authorization codes may vary, depends on the kind of application, whatever we are going to use. So what are the authorization codes do we have in all everything? So that's what generally the authorization codes which we have to be prepared, right? So because code permissions has to be given to the user agents first. So once the authorization code was taken by the user agents and all that, normally there is a connect of client application where we have to redirect to issue whatever the access tokens we want to issue and all everything will be connected from the client applications to the authorization servers. Normally, whenever we are working on this client application, so there are different steps which we have to follow when it comes to the authorization process itself is concerned. There are different steps which we have to follow when we are going to implement authorization server and resource servers and all everything. So there are different steps we have to follow whenever we are working on this as follows. There are stepwise procedures which I am going to write. Do you want to write down as a notes, or do you want me to write here?
It's okay. I can also write, not a problem.
Right. So these are the authorization code steps is what something I'm writing. Okay. Steps as follows. Right. So that's what generally the steps which I'm going to write here. You can make it perfectly. The step one where we have to import auth code server project from the auth workspace. Right. So this is the first thing which we have to do. Whenever we are working on this authorization server connects and all that. First of all, we have to import the auth code, especially auth code server project and all everything from the auth workspace. This is the first thing which we have to do. Auth. Next step, we need to ensure that whatever the security the auth 2 dependencies we have, that will be added in the form XML files. Right. This is form.xml files and all. So this is where the second step which normally we follow. So when we are importing the auth code server project from the auth workspace, then the first one. Second step, we need to ensure the security auth dependencies, which must be added to the form.xml files and all everything in the second step. Now, when it comes to the third step, we also should ensure that resource server credentials must be added in application.properties file. Okay, so this is where generally we have to add all the credentials and all, right? So wherever this application.property files to be here. So there we have to ensure whatever the resource owner credentials and all, we need to add it to the application.property files and all everything is that. So next point is that if we want to protect the user resources, through an oauth, here we need to create some packages like package.com, at the same time package.example, at the same time whatever the auth code server .apis we have, right? So all this in the controller level, right? So this is what something which normally we have to follow whenever we are working on the step 4, right? So this is where it was. So once we have connected this, the next we need to identify and we need to perform the configuration part, where we have to configure the authorization server to generate access token and optionally refresh token.package. Right, so this is what generally we have to do when it comes to the configuration part itself is concerned. So next, once we have configured the authorization servers, which will be used to generate access tokens and optionally refreshing the token.packages. Next, we need to configure the resource server, which will be used to protect resources by validating access token, right? So this is also validating the access token that packages and all of the thing is what something which we have to configure. This is what generally the step which we have to be focused more when we are working on the authorization code is concerned, right? So whenever we are implementing the authorization code, this is what generally the step we need to see. So once it was done, we need to start the auth provider by running as a standalone application, and all that. So whenever we are running this on a standalone application, whatever the authorization request we are going to mention, the kind of responses, whatever the access token request, which I was mentioned you so far, right? So all these steps, which normally we usually follow whenever we are working on the authorization code. So whenever we are trying to grant the kind of permissions, especially on the oauth protocol flow, oauth application implementation in microservices, in reference to the grant permission itself is concerned, one is the first type of grant type is called authorization code, where in this authorization code, we have to import the oauth code servers and all everything from the project first. So once we have imported it, we need to ensure what are the security of oauth dependencies, which must be added to the pom.xml files, all that. So after that, we need to ensure what are the resource server credentials, which must be added in the application properties files and all. Next, in order to protect the user resources through oauth 2.0, we have to create some packages and as well as package examples, right? So all these things we have to update in this. Next, we need to configure the authorization server, which majorly used to generate access tokens and optionally refresh the token packages, all that. Followed by this, we need to configure the resource servers to protect what are the resources we want to validate access token packages and all will be taken to next level. Last but not least, we need to start oauth providers by running a standalone application in regular intervals. So these are the steps which normally we follow whenever we are working on authorization code, when we are granting permissions through authorization code. These are the steps which normally we have to be taken. Clear? Understood?
Yes.